I'm going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting of May 16th, 2024. If we can start, please rise for a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Mr. Jamie Girardi?
Here.
Mr. Christopher Poole?
Here.
Mr. John Moody?
Here.
Mr. Matthew Munn?
Here.
Mr. Derek Pontlett? Mr. Chris Williams?
Here.
Chairman Charles Gray?
Okay, for those of you that haven't been here before, I'm just going to go over a few things real quick. The Planning Commission serves as a local planning agency. We hold public hearings and transmit to the Board of County Commissioners recommendations on comprehensive plan amendments, land development code amendments, rezonings, and conditional use requests. The Planning Commission is the final decision-making body for special exceptions, certain appeals, variance requests, and certain alternative standard requests. However, final decisions may be appealed to the Board of County Commissioners. If anyone is in opposition to any comprehensive plan amendment, land development code amendment, rezoning, conditional use, or any item where the Planning Commission transmits a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, it is important that you attend the appropriate Board of County Commissioners meeting. Do we have any minutes to approve?
Yes.
We do. Yep.
All right.
Motion to approve? Second.
Okay, that's a motion to approve the minutes from the April 4th, 2024 meeting.
Correct.
Seconded. Any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, the first thing we're going to do today, I guess first, if you have any cell phones or pagers, please make sure they're in a silent position so we're not interrupted. And the first thing we'll do is take any public comment on any items that are not on today's agenda. So is there anybody here to speak to anything not on the agenda? Okay, perfect.
And Mr. Chair, for the record, we have no one signed up to speak on WebEx, neither for public comment nor for any of the items on the agenda.
Okay. Very good. So next we'll move on to the public hearing procedures portion of the agenda. For those that aren't familiar, haven't been to a meeting before, there's three sections in the agenda is broken down into three sections. First are withdrawals. Second are continuances, and then consent. And then I said three, but there's actually four. Then there's the regular items will be heard after all those items. Public hearing procedures, in-person participants, and participants attending through WebEx, including the applicants who are pre-registered for the Planning Commission meeting, will be notified by county staff when they're permitted to speak. Applicants are limited to 5 minutes and other participants are limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is approved at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. I don't think we have anybody today, do we, Denise?
That is correct. No one has requested additional time.
If you come up to speak, we ask that you, first you'll be sworn, and we'll swear everybody in at one time here in a minute. But when you come up to speak, please announce your name, address, and then the agenda item or the agenda title that you're going to speak with, and then your 3-minute timer will start. Today, I believe there are 9 items in total on the agenda, plus an ordinance at the end. There's 1 withdrawal item, 2 continuances, 5 consent, and then the ordinance at the end of the agenda that'll be part of the regular agenda. The consent items, when we go through the agenda, they'll be approved as a vote altogether, unless anything's pulled from the consent. And then once a motion is made, the chair will call for a second, and the motion will be voted on. Do we have proof of publication, Clerk?
The items are advertised in the Tampa Bay Times on April 3rd, 2024, April 17th, 2024, and May 1st, 2024, and by affidavit of certified mailings and site postings.
Okay, and then the last thing before we get started, if anybody's planning to speak today during the agenda, if we can stand to be sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, so help you God?
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members. Denise Hernandez, Planning and Economic Growth Department. First item is PC2, which is PEG 247768. It's a special exception in the name of John Azuki. On this item, it's been withdrawn from consideration, so there is no further action required.
Okay.
Following
Thank
item is item PC3, PEG 247739. It's a zoning amendment, Fletcher MPUD, Mary L. Fletcher, Revocable Trust, and Richard D. Fletcher. The request is to continue the item to the June 20th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting at 1:30 in Newport Richey.
Okay. Is the applicant present? Is there anybody here to speak on this item? Okay. We'll go to the next one.
Following item is PC4, PEG 240336. On this item, you're sitting as a local planning agency. It's a land development code amendment, and it was notified for continuance. It is the continuance date is to the local planning agency meeting on 6/20/2024 at 1:30 in Newport Richey.
Okay. Is there anybody here to speak on this item? Okay. And is that all the continuous items, Denise? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve items PC3 and PC4 continue to June 20th in Newport Richey.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Following item PC5, which is PEG 247783, in the name of Dejan and Jordana Vujinovic, is going to be pulled from consent. We do have some folks here who are in opposition to the item. So we're going to move on to item PC6. And that is PEG 247784. It's in the name of William J. and Brent A. Norwood, Norwood Irrevocable Trust, and Norwood Workshop LLC. Norwood Irrevocable Trust. It's for a change in zoning from an R1MH, single-family mobile home district, and C2 general commercial district with conditions to a C2 general commercial district with a voluntarily agreed-upon deed restriction related to the Live Local Act. Comes to you with a recommendation of approval.
Okay, is the applicant present? Is there anybody here? Do you want to speak? Okay, is there anybody here to speak on this item? Okay, anything from up here? Everybody good? Okay.
Move on to the following item. Item PC7 is PEG 247786. It's a zoning amendment. Wilson Jader and Matthew Hernandez. It's for a change in zoning from an MPUD, Master Plan Unit Development District, to an AR, Agricultural Residential District. Comes to you with a recommendation of approval.
Okay, is the applicant present?
On
Is there
this
any-
one, I'm going to read a couple of corrections into the record. So those were sent to the Planning Commission members and also to the clerk's office. There was incorrect notation in the references section in terms of the location of the board meeting. So it should say PC at NPR 51624, BCC at NPR 61824. And then also in finding of fact number 8, there were 3 following actions on the site, and now they're listed as 2, which is the correct actions that occurred on the site. Again, those have been provided to the clerk's office.
Okay. Okay, is there anybody here to speak on this item? Anything from up here? Okay, the next one?
Next item, you're sitting as a local planning agency. It's item PC8, PEG 240098. It is a comprehensive plan amendment, CPAS 2317, Hudson Commercial. It's for a comprehensive plan amendment to future land use maps 2-15 and sheet 03, changing from IL Industrial Light to COM on approximately 4.82 acres of property located on the north side of New York Avenue If you would please take public comment on this item, we're asking that you find the item consistent with the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan and that you recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, is the applicant present? Is there anybody here to speak on this item? Anything from the dais? Okay,
And then the following item is PC9. You're also sitting as a local planning agency on this matter. It's PEG 240262, Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CPAS 2325, 52 Realty Commercial is for Comprehensive Plan Amendment to Future Land Use Maps 2-15 and Sheet 12, which is changing from Res 3, residential 3 dwelling units per acre, to COM Commercial, OF Office, and CON Conservation on approximately 8.84 acres on the south side of State Road 52, approximately 3,300 feet west of Land O'Lakes Boulevard. On this item, if you would please take public comment, we're asking that you find it consistent with the Pasco County Comprehensive Plan and recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners.
okay, is the applicant present? Is there anybody here to speak on this item? Okay, anything from up here? All right, and I think
And that
that's
concludes your consent agenda.
all the consent. Okay, so we have PC 6, 7, 8, and 9 on the consent.
So motion to approve the consent order consisting of PC 6, PC 7, PC 8, PC 9 with the corrections noted to PC 7 that Denise read into the record.
Okay, is there a second? Motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to PC 5. Welcome, Liam.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Liam Devine, Planning and Economic Growth Department. So this is PC 5, PEG 24-7783, and I'm going to try to pronounce this name the best I can, and I apologize for pronouncing it wrong. Dejan Gordana Vunovic, which I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, so I do apologize. This is a Euclidean zoning amendment from AR with conditions to AR Agricultural Residential District without conditions. The future land use is Res 3 under the comprehensive plan. The applicant proposes to subdivide the property and build one additional single-family dwelling on a new lot in conformance with the AR Agricultural Residential District standards. I would like to note that there is no voluntary deed restriction with this, so with this rezoning, it could allow up to 4 dwelling units. The subject site is located in the northwest corner of Seabiscuit Lane and Giddy Up Lane. It's located in the North Market area and is outside of the urban concentration and rural areas. Here is our context map. Here's a zoomed in aerial of the subject site. The surrounding future land use is Res 3. And the surrounding zoning is AR Agricultural Residential. The subject site contains a single-family dwelling on approximately 5.07 acres, and access to the site is from Seabiscuit Lane and Giddy Up Lane, which are both ingress-egress easements with a, approximately 50 feet of width for those easements. On June 27, 2006, the Board of County Commissioners, BCC, approved rezoning petition number 6530 to add these conditions. There were 2 conditions added to that. One of the conditions were specifically rezoning approval that only allowed a minimum lot size to be 5 acres per lot. The other one required the total acreage not have to go through subdivision review. So there could only be subdivided 12 times. Each lot would have to be 5 acres for the minimum lot size and did not require to go through subdivision review. Again, by approving this rezoning request, you would be removing all of the conditions requiring the applicant to go through subdivision review, allowing him to subdivide the property another time to build his one single-family home that he proposes. And this is coming with recommendation for approval from Planning and Economic Growth Department.
Okay, any
Here,
questions?
if you have any questions.
Any questions for Liam?
Did you say he would or would not be required to go through the subdivision?
So the previous rezoning action had a condition that did not require them to go through subdivision review. If he rezones, he would be required to go through subdivision review because you would be removing that condition.
I see. And then the deed restriction, you said there was no deed restriction, so this could potentially allow four additional,
And not four additional, four in total.
four total lots. And is there a reason, did staff ask for a deed restriction?
Staff did not ask for a deed restriction.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, is the applicant present? Would you like to speak at this time, or I'm assuming we have other people, so I guess we'll now take public comment on this item.
The first person signed up to speak is David Esther.
Good afternoon. David Esther, 11512 Seabiscuit Lane, Hudson, Florida, 34669. As you mentioned, this has already gone through this process once before. At that time, we fought it hard, but we did agree and we gave in to allowing for 5-acre lots, but the whole intention of that area was to be nothing less than 5 acres, so that our homes would be protected and maintain a certain level. You know, they're all block homes, they're all well-maintained. Our roads couldn't handle the traffic. Even when Mariano came out and visited, he agreed the roads were not in condition for that. The changing this, even though it just impacts one particular thing, opens the door to all the other neighbors doing the same thing, wanting to split, wanting to sell off another piece, more and more homes coming in, nobody taking ownership of fixing the roads, things like that. We've even put the road to a vote test before to try and turn it over to the county and get it paved so that we could have better conditions, like even mail at our houses instead of down at the Kitten Trail. That requires 100% approval. So adding this house in, you're impacting our road impact without 100% approval of us. Our roads have been smoothed out a little bit. He dumped a bunch of concrete. There was no meeting. There was no, can we do this? There was no agreement to put that stuff down, to change the roads, to impact that, or to even, it can no longer be graded. I can't maintain it myself. It's solid concrete. You have to watch out for sharp rocks sticking up. We can't have another house, another septic tank, another well. The county just approved, I was just in a meeting not too long ago, they approved over 300 homes behind us. If you wanted smaller property, sell your house and go somewhere and get that. That's the way I look at it. I bought 2 properties. I bought one for me and my in-laws bought the one next to me. We're not looking to subdivide them. Originally, people were looking to subdivide them into 1-acre lots, which then is going to downgrade the type of homes that go on there, from nice homes that are probably well over $400,000, $500,000 in value to trailers. And we're looking to avoid that. Why I like to accommodate, especially if it's a family need, and split the property. I got a family member coming in. At the same time, I don't want to open up that door to the next property next to them doing the same thing, the 2 across from them doing that. Now I've got 4 houses on the road. I just went through construction of a new house in front of me. I can't tell you how many times I couldn't get down the road because of construction equipment blocking the entire pathway. Even though I have 22% interest in that easement, and they have 6% interest in that easement, and now you're going to split it more. This is an ongoing problem. We're going to add that more construction. If we open it up to other homes, that's going to be even more problematic. So while I'd like to compromise, I just don't want to open that door. And removing that condition that was put in place and already split that property once, now we're going to do it again. I want to avoid that. And I think I covered, I think they told me 3 minutes.
Yeah, David.
I've
just-
tried to
just-
skim through it all.
That was your 3-minute timer.
perfect.
Try to wrap it up real quick.
I tried to
if you
get
can.
it all in. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't know it was a 3-minute time limit.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Thank you for coming, though.
All right. Any questions for me, or? All right.
The next person signed up to speak is Linda Ruggieri.
Good afternoon, my name is Linda Ruggieri. I live at 11528 Seabiscuit Lane, and that was my son-in-law. The only thing that I'm going to add is that Commissioner Mariano attended a resident meeting that we had. and he personally observed the road. He agreed that splitting parcels was not in the best interest of the residents, and the commission denied the request. He physically came out, he saw exactly, how the roads are, what the conditions are, and it's not a good idea to split it again. We thought we finished that, but it came up again.
When was this meeting?
Hmm?
When was the meeting that Commissioner Mariano came out and
A
saw the
few,
road?
5 years ago? 2006. 2006.
We've been there for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And like he said, when we bought it, we bought 5 acres each with not any intentions of splitting it. We want to keep the integrity of our development. A lot of people have moved in and put a lot of, there's more horses, there's more animals on the property, which is nice. We don't want to upset that. So I had other things to say, but my son-in-law said it again already, so I don't want to waste your time. But I don't feel it's a good idea to allow this to
Okay.
happen.
Very good. Thanks for coming.
I don't have anyone else signed up to speak on this matter.
Okay, as the applicant now, you guys do have a time you can come up and rebut anything you heard, or you can come up and do your presentation now, if you want to come up and speak.
Good afternoon, guys. My name is Dian Azutavinovic, 14565 Gideon Lane. So when we moved there, 5 years ago? 4 years ago, you could barely pass through that road. There was potholes. You would literally have to drive onto the neighbor's property to get by. We volunteered with a couple other neighbors to bring in, road stuff to fix it up, so it was fine and dandy. So we're just trying to add another home to the property. I guess this is the process that we have to go through to hopefully get there. But we're just trying to get one more house for my in-laws on there. There will be no further development, or selling. So whatever deed restriction we need to add on it, that's absolutely fine with us.
Okay. Anything from up here?
Question for staff when they come back.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the problem, the problem that's created and why the whole issue of the deed restrictions came up is because if it's just approved the way it is, it opens the door for not only you, but also your neighbors, and kind of sets the precedence for in the future for the subdivision, as Liam explained, that goes to 4 lots instead of 1 lot, it becomes 4, and then it kind of
Understand that, but it
snowballs
also
out of
says
control
that
there.
it's
So,
only block homes. Meanwhile, the neighbor across from us was allowed to put a modular home there. I don't know by who or how or what, but so those restrictions that were put in place at once, that it's only block, that doesn't exist anymore since we have a fully modular home right across the street from us.
yeah, I don't, David, as far as enforcement of deed restrictions, I mean, does that go back to the building department, or?
Is there a deed restriction?
I don't think there is a deed restriction.
Okay.
Well, okay. I don't know if they have a private deed restriction, but in terms of the public restrictions, I don't think there's any, and Liam can tell me if I'm wrong, the prior conditions of approval didn't require block homes, did they?
The conditions on the current zoning district that's on there does not require block homes.
So I'm not sure where this requirement is that you're talking
He
about.
just mentioned the block home, so I wasn't aware if there's any details as of that.
Maybe they're all voluntarily putting block homes, but I'm not aware, unless there's some private restrictions out there, that's not a county-imposed requirement.
No, definitely not, no.
As far as maintenance of the roads go, I mean, those are private roads out there, so who's responsible to maintain those? There looks like there's probably an easement
It's a
over
good,
the
I mean,
roads?
I don't know, guys, I mean, we've been there for 4 years, and as I said, when we moved in, literally you would have to drive onto the neighbor's property to go up the road, since it was falling apart and that the sugar sand was not coming through. So nobody has maintained the road since Mickey did it the last time. So I don't know what they're talking about grading. I haven't seen him on a tractor once.
Okay.
So,
Liam, are the easements county right-of-way easements, or are they private ingress-egress easements?
If you give me a moment, let me double check on that. I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
Yeah, and just for, we can't take comments from the audience there, because we have to be able to pick it up on the microphone for the clerk, so.
I mean, finding two in the agenda memo says they're ingress egress easements, but I guess we'll let Liam confirm they're not.
I'm confirming it by looking at their legal description. There are ingress and egress easements.
So there's no county or public right to use these roads.
I don't know the answer to that, David. I just know that they're called out as ingress and egress easements. They are listed, it is a named road. Giddy Up Lane, for example, is a named road. It is listed as privately maintained residential.
Well, was this area, it's not platted then? Those aren't platted.
It is not platted, hence the condition of approval stating that they didn't have to go through subdivision review.
So, and David, I don't know if you want to get in. I'll ask you a legal question. I don't know if you got the answer or not. We see this often where someone will deed by meets and bounds a piece of property and then and then subject to an ingress egress easement over 15 feet or 25 feet. When they create that ingress egress easement, does that necessarily give the beneficiary of that easement any right to improve the easement? My understanding of an easement is you now have the right to go across that area of land, but you don't necessarily have the right to pave that land or grade that land or do anything else with it.
I mean, without seeing the easement, I don't know that I can answer the question, because it depends on the terms of the easement.
I see.
So I don't have the easement that you're referring to know what. But I think you would generally have the right to maintain it, so that you
Somebody
have.
has to maintain it.
I mean, if it's an ingress egress easement, to the extent you need to make improvements to allow you to ingress and egress to your property, I think you have that right, because otherwise you would lose the benefit of your ingress and egress easement.
The problem is, sir, that that's a sugar sand azo area, so as soon as the top layer of whatever is applied to it breaks loose, the sugar sand just comes up, and you just cannot drive through that without a 4x4 or anything. So it's not like it's just a flat dirt road, you know, that nobody takes care of. Like, it has to be maintained in order that to be azo usable.
And did I hear you say you were willing to deed restrict this to?
No, I was just saying that if we need to put any restrictions onto my property, you know, that I'm only allowed to do this one zoning, just to allow one dwelling, you know, I'm totally okay with that. I'm not planning on developing something there and selling off lots or something, you know. It's my family property, so we're planning on staying there.
I understand. And did the staff talk to you about AR1 zoning?
What
The
exactly?
difference between AR and AR1 is AR allows for mobile homes, where AR1 only allows for site-built homes.
I mean, to be honest with you, sir, I came in here, to your colleagues to ask to build a house. You know, they started this whole process.
I understand.
I'm just going along as of it is, so I'm not requiring any kind of rezoning or anything, but I just want to know how I can put another dwelling on the property. So whatever you tell me.
It's fine, what I'm trying to find out is if you would be opposed if we made a recommendation for AR1 zoning, which would then require that any home that you built on that site be a site-built home. I don't want to say a block home, because it could be a wood frame home, but it would have to be a site-built home, not
Well,
a mobile
definitely,
home.
we already have the blueprints for
It might be
block
easier
home.
if he's doing a deed restriction to just put in the deed
That's
restriction.
another way, yes.
He could just deed restrict it that it's one additional site-built home. That's easier, I think, than changing the zoning application to something else.
So whatever the easiest way is, most painless way to get this done, that's,
Denise, in 2006, did the is it AR5, did that exist?
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious, and I don't know if you know the history, and it probably doesn't matter that they zoned it AR, but then conditioned it being 5-acre lots rather than 1 acre lots.
It's very strange to me because there's AR5 adjacent to the north, so that, I don't understand why they didn't do an AR5. But yes, it did exist in 2006. Oh, okay, Liam knows the answer.
And it doesn't have to be 1 acre, sir. I mean, if I have to like split it in half, whichever, whatever number comes up to,
I don't think I'm listening to the neighbors, I'm hearing the neighbors' concerns, and I hear your intent. And I don't think, there's probably not anybody up here that has any problem with what you're proposing. It's what happens if you all of a sudden decide to sell the property, or you should have some tragic loss in the family, you've got to sell this, and the next guy comes along and then wants to divide it up into 1 acre lots. So I think that's what any concern here might be. I'm not even quite sure I have a concern
well,
about
that's
that.
why I said, if you want to put that deed on it, that it cannot be subdivided anymore as of further, I'm totally okay with that.
And I appreciate that. I do.
Okay, so here's the answer. So basically what occurred at the hearing in 2006 is that there was a motion for denial, and that motion actually carried through. Then Commissioner Mariano, within that motion for denial, directed staff to do a staff-initiated rezoning for the area to AR5. Because the folks in the room, I suppose, wanted to move forward with the zoning action, they're like, well, why can't we just put a condition on the AR that they're 5 acre lots, and then that other condition that stated that they don't have to go through subdivision review was added. So, but originally there was a request from Commissioner Mariano to do a staff-initiated
That's odd,
rezoning to
is
AR5.
because AR5 is a less stringent, I mean, I think, or more stringent, I should say, zoning district, so I don't know why they couldn't have just moved approval for AR5 at the dais.
I don't know the answer to that, but that's what was offered up by the development director and the then acting zoning administrator.
I guess either way, though, they would be seeking a rezoning anyway from, even if it was currently AR5, they'd be seeking a rezoning. Instead of from AR, they'd be seeking it from AR5.
I understand. Have you spoken to Commissioner Mariano, since he's the guy that made this recommendation?
Me?
Yes.
No, sir, I didn't.
Staff?
No, we have not spoken to Commissioner Mariano.
Okay.
Should I? I mean, I wasn't advised to, since it's been like almost 20 years. So
Well, I'm Commissioner Mariano's appointment to this board. I'm hesitant to make a motion that is contrary to something he did in the past. Maybe he has had a change of heart or change of mind, and I think it might be a wise idea if you were to consult with Commissioner Mariano, and maybe the neighbors should consult with Commissioner Mariano, and I would tell you that I'm probably leaning towards a continuance to allow you to go do that.
The other reason a continuance might be advisable is there's no deed restriction before you. I mean, normally when an applicant wants to propose a deed restriction, it's on your agenda, like you actually.
Yes, yeah. There's been a couple of times it hasn't, but yeah, I agree with you.
But it's obviously up to the planning commission.
Yeah, I mean, my concern on this one, just frankly, is that it sounds like the roads are problematic as they are, and even though it's only one person, one house, one additional lot, we're adding more traffic to that road.
Without a mechanism to improve it.
Correct.
That's my issue with that. And I generally wouldn't be opposed to this kind of thing, other than that there was already a past decision that 5 acres was the appropriate zoning, whether it be AR1 with a condition, or I'm sorry, AR with a condition, or AR5.
Liam,
But times have changed, and maybe he's changed his mind, so I.
Liam,
think it might be
did we
good.
get an answer on the roads on what the ownership of the roads was, or did you have any more information on that?
I didn't find anything else. I don't know if Denise found anything else.
I have not.
Well, if they're not county maintained, that means the county does not own them by maintenance. The only other way I could think we would own them would be by deed or plat, but it's not platted, so unless somebody deeded these roads to the county, which seems unlikely, is the property appraiser showing them as,
They're shown as private in the
Private?
mapper, yep.
I don't think I think they're all privately owned.
Yeah, my concern with this one is the precedent that it sets for the neighborhood, and I agree with Commissioner Moody that I'd feel more comfortable if that matters was discussed with Commissioner Mariano, honestly.
And I would echo that. I mean, you open the door for all the neighbors to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't want to deny you today, because I'd like to,
Right.
I can
Yeah,
tell
we
you
appreciate what
personally,
you're
I'd
trying to
like to speak to
accomplish.
him about this. Like I said, it's not quite 20 years since the rezoning happened, and things are different in the county today. I don't know whether he feels the same way today as he did then, but I think it would behoove all of us to take a breather for a minute and then get his opinion on this, and then take the matter up again. So I'd make the motion to continue this to a date uncertain to, well,
Sorry, I only cringe because I don't want to have to do renoticing
okay.
and add that additional
Well, then
expense.
I will ask staff what would be the next available date that we could hear this that would allow time for you guys maybe to set up a discussion and maybe have the commissioner make a field trip out there. I don't know whatever he wants to do.
So then, I don't know that this is going to allow us enough time, but the next planning commission meeting that is on this side of the county is June 18th. The one that follows that is July 25th. Do you want to continue it to July 25th?
Yeah,
So that does
that'd be-
provide enough time?
Okay.
Okay, there's a motion for continuance to July 25th. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion up here?
Do we have to be here in person?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? This will be continued to July 25th. Newport Richey.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the next item, or the last item, is PC 10. Roberto, you have this one? All right.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Roberto Becerril, Development Review Department. Thank you. Everything got reorganized, or? Still working on that. Today we are presenting to you a zoning amendment. An ordinance by the Pasco County Board of County Commissioners amending the Pasco County Land Development Code to address invasive vegetation and amending sections 403.1.
Let me stop here. You don't need to read the whole title of Planning Commission.
Oh, okay.
You do at the board, but not a Planning Commission, so.
All right. Well, we're here
Long
to
title, I'm just saving you some.
address the invasive vegetation.
I was going to ask you if you needed some water, but you're good.
Thank you, David. That saved me some time.
It's the weed amendment.
So this is amendment number 49, and the proposed amendments were previewed by the Interest Department on March 28th, and also presented to the Horizontal Roundtable on April 17th. And the invasive vegetation removal, we are amending quite a few sections of the code. Most of them are relying on the construction element and anticipation of any construction of those. For example, on the PDP's preliminary development plat residentials, the non-residentials, the preliminary site plans, basically these sections are amended to require that applicants for these approvals must include, and I have it too here, an invasive vegetation management plan and management in perpetuity. This amendment also adds that invasive vegetation requirements contained on the county's targeted invasive species list found on the Development Review Manual, and these are based on the Florida Invasive Species Council. We're going to refer that to FISC, so I'm going to still trying to remember that. And this is a list that holds about 175 species. And this list, they have two types, which are the Category 1 and Categories 2. The Category 1s are the ones that are more aggressive. The Category 2s are not as aggressive as the ones. And sometimes the FISC or that group, not sometimes, they evaluate it, and sometimes they move them from the Category 1 to the Category 2, or from the Category 2 to the Category 1. And sometimes they even eliminate some of these invasive species. So, but we're going to base this amendment with the Development Review Manual. They also include an invasive management plan requiring removal of invasive vegetation, VMPs, providing for the appropriate method of disposal to prevent propagation, and ongoing maintenance and monitoring controls of invasive species. Not all the invasive plants can be eliminated the same manner. Some of them can be mechanically removed, some of them can be trimmed, some of them can be burned, and some of them they cannot. They cannot be trimmed, they have to be different methods of removal. But all those are also going to be included in the Development Review Manual. So the invasive vegetation management plan shall also be managed in perpetuity by the HOA, the CDD, the property owner, or the applicable entity or assigned responsible party. So with that in mind, we are amending sections 403.1, again, like I said, the preliminary development plan residentials. Section 403, the preliminary development plan non-residential mixed use. Section 403, the preliminary site plans, and these are new subsections that we're including. Section 403.4, stormwater management. 403.5, the construction plans. Again, these are new sections that we're including. Section 403, fill. On this one, we need to be also careful that the fill that is brought in that does not have some of these seeds or is not contaminated with any of these invasive species rhizomas or any other elements. So that's pretty much the intent of this one. It's also a new subsection. Mass grading, section 403.7. 403.10, landscape. And then also we're going to amend the operating permit sections, which is 401.3, which is a minor land excavation. 404.2, it's a land excavation operating permit. The mining permit on section 404.3, 404.4, construction and demolition debris disposal facilities, operating permits. 404.5, line spreading operating permits. 404.6, yard trash processing facilities. And also, we're also doing the right-of-way use permit, 406.4. So as you see, anything that has to do with dirt or soil movement, we were trying to capture on all these sections. Some of these sections are already, well, I haven't got there yet. The garden plan permit, which is for section 406.8. Section 503, which is the supplemental regulations. And now we're also revising some of this language, like on the overlay and special district areas, northeast Pasco rural protection areas, which was kind of included some of these elements, but we're revising it. Natural and cultural resources protection, section 804.8 for ecological corridors. We're clarifying what some of these invasive species. And then on chapter 900, which is the development standards, we are adding subsections on 901.2, the transportation corridor management, on 901.3, which is the access management, 901.4, substandard roadway, 901.6, the street design and dedication requirements. 901.6, we're also adding language. And bicycle facilities, 901.7, and pedestrian facilities, 901.8, adding new subsections. And we're adding a new definition for invasive vegetation or invasive plant species. And we find the proposed ordinance amendment consistent with the comprehensive plan, and ask of you to recommend approval for the Board of County Commissioners. I'm missing one slide. And this amendment will go to the BCC on, if you recommend approval, it will go to the BCC on June 4th for the first reading, and then it'll go to June 18th for the adoption. Any questions?
So, when I met with you a little more than a week ago, we talked about, was it necessary to include the submittal requirement for an invasive species evaluation for applications which didn't necessarily authorize construction, substandard roadway, access management? And now I'm looking at preliminary development plan, because I just pulled up in Muni Code that it says in E, under preliminary development plan, effective approval, a PDP authorizes developer to apply for stormwater management plan and report review, construction plan review, draft record plat review when no improvements are required. So I'm curious as why the need. I understand why the request when there was going to be construction, but why the need if there's not construction authorized by the approval? I mean, and a lot of times, I see Barbara sitting back there, she may be involved in a rezoning where we're looking at whether or not, evaluating whether or not roads are substandard, and she'll have the traffic engineer apply for substandard road review, and they may determine a road substandard and needs to be approved, but that doesn't authorize the construction. You still have to prepare a construction plan for the improvements and acquire a right-of-way permit to do that. So I'm personally hesitant to saddle an applicant at very early stages of a project with this requirement. When they get to the construction phase, I get it, I understand. I just think maybe we're potentially creating an unnecessary burden in the early and planning stages of a project.
And correct me if I'm wrong, or do you want to go ahead? We did take some of your comments.
I saw you did, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
So you're right. It doesn't have to be started until the construction piece comes along. And to my understanding, there's really no reason for not to bring the applicant to the understanding that this is what's expected of them.
Well, of course, so one could issue a condition, make it a standard condition that you're going to submit. And we see that all the time. For instance, someone comes in and applies for an MPUD zoning, and there'll be a standard condition that you'll have to come and do a 100% gopher tortoise survey before you construct. But they don't have to do a 100% gopher tortoise survey to apply for a rezoning. And so I question whether it's necessary that they go out and do an invasive species inventory, and then especially, we haven't gotten to that part about what's required in the inventory, but that seems like a bit of an onerous burden on them during the preliminary planning phases of a project. Again, the construction phases, I get it. It just seems that maybe we could eliminate it for the preliminary development plan, the access management. I understand if we want to put conditions, And I think in the access management, you actually weren't making it a submittal requirement, it was a maintenance condition, I get that, that's fine. But substandard road review, that doesn't actually authorize any construction.
But that has been fixed for your request. I don't know if maybe it's not in this draft. I'm scrolling through it right now trying to find it, because I actually made that edit myself. And I don't see a red line version of this.
It's down at it's at the bottom of the agenda memo, Elizabeth. It's at the end.
It's in the memo itself.
So under it says 901.4, substandard roadway analysis and mitigation, E, submittal information, 8, and then it says if determined that roadway deficiencies are required to be corrected, compliance with this subsection shall be required, identify all invasive vegetation, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But it would seem to me,
So I thought I took care of it.
right, that, they still have to get a right-of-way permit to do any substandard roadway mitigation, so that would be something you would do for the right-of-way permit.
I don't care where it is, if it's in substandard and right of way, or just right of way, as long as the situation is captured. Frankly, I don't.
Yeah, again, my concern is I just hate to see burdening an applicant in a planning phase of a project in the early phases with doing something that's more applicable at time of construction.
And then, if I may, so I know I met with y'all, and I appreciate the information. I still had a couple of questions, and just so you all know what I brought up. I mean, it's one thing if we're developing like a 20-acre school site and clearing the whole thing and building a school. The example I gave to staff was our Cypress Creek campus. We have a middle school, high school. We have over 200 acres of wetlands. And we built the high school first. My concern is probably along maybe some of your thinking too, is the way this reads. And I know y'all told me it's confined within the project area, but my concern is if I'm going out and developing out of 150 acres, I'm developing 50 acres. The way and I'm constructing the high school, the way I read it is I'm required to look at all of the uplands, even though I know you guys said, it's only confined to the project area, but it says that I'm to look at anything, all those located on the uplands. So to me, when I read that, that's my entire property. And my concern is how much money am I gonna have to spend to do all the uplands? And then it says, those portions of wetlands where impacts are authorized. So let's say I impact an acre of that 200 acres of wetlands. I know you said it was only focused on the project area, but I'm afraid that 10 years from now, somebody else is going to interpret that to mean the entire 200 acres of wetlands. And then I think about what kind of cost is that? And again, I'm not against trying to get rid of invasive species, but I sit there and think how much it's going to cost me to send people out in 200 acres of wetlands and come up with a management if I'm not really impacting that much. So that was one of my questions. And I know we've talked about it, but I'm just letting you know I'm still a little concerned with the language of that and how it might be interpreted later on.
Where was this, Chris?
I think it's pretty much all the same. I'm looking at I just pulled one from 901.6.
Oh, okay.
D, where it says, identify all invasive vegetation, ... located on the uplands and within those portions of wetlands where impacts are authorized. And so if I'm impacting 1 acre of that 200 wetlands, I see it could be interpreted both ways. And that's one of my concerns. And then the other thing, you guys, I know it's been mentioned a little bit, but again, part of my concern was the cost on this fill. And I asked my engineer, he didn't really know, and I was hoping maybe some of you engineers could fill it in. So if we're building a school and, like LL, the K8 we're building, we just had to bring in $3 million worth of fill. Is that normally tested for invasive species, or how much more would, and again, if you're putting a building over the top of it versus, those are some, I'm concerned about costs.
I was going to ask, that was gonna be one of my next questions about the fill.
Right.
Because there's a condition that your fill can't contain any seeds.
Right.
I've been doing this 30 years. I know of no soil test
That's what I thought.
that is going to be able to go through
Right.
and identify if there are seeds from some invasive, exotic, or nuisance species, or seeds from anything else for that matter, just period, the end. Where does one, I don't know how much, I'm sure you guys are not, I have to deal with this every day, but you don't go out and buy dirt. When I go out and buy dirt, I'm buying, clean fill.
Right.
There's nobody's inspecting this for noxious weed seeds, and I don't know of any way for them to do that. I mean, I guess I could send it to some lab at some university and pay them a couple of $100,000 and they could do that. I understand your intent.
Yes.
I'm just not sure that the requirement itself is practical.
Well, can I ask
Yeah,
a
and
follow-up question? Wouldn't if you're requiring an invasive species management plan on that same property where the fill's brought in, wouldn't that require them to basically get rid of any invasive species that grow out of those seeds anyway? So if the property owner is already obligated to basically stop the growth of the invasive species, if the seed does manifest itself, why do you need to worry so much about the seeds?
You don't?
I've got a question about that, David, and maybe Brad can help me here. I mean, you can bring fill into a project separate and apart from developing it for some purpose. So there's no other, site plan being submitted or something, right? I mean, I could be stupid on this, not of the facts, but if that situation happened independently of any other kind of plan being done, you would want to catch that, because there's no then trigger to go clean it up. This whole thing is application driven.
Well, okay, so did we amend the fill permit section to
I'm
include
not
this?
sure, I've only seen what
'Cause
sections I've been checking.
One needs to get a fill permit in order to fill.
Right.
All right, if that's all you're doing is filling, and then there's a fine line between what becomes a mass grading permit and a preliminary development plan and a fill permit, and that's kind of at the discretion of the staff. But, I mean, I can assure you, I'll give you PAW's number and you can call them, and they're not going to be able to tell you whether there are any noxious weed seeds in their fill dirt that they just bought off my site.
Well,
Could-
but I
I
guess
mean,
the
they
question
get rid
is,
of
could we
their
require,
rights
to your point, Elizabeth, is there a way to trigger the invasive species management plan once you bring the fill in?
If that's what that section was doing, I thought that was independent of any other application being.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way it reads, though. And I should have brought this up when we met last week, but it doesn't read that way to me. And to John's point, there is, clean fill is kind of chemically clean fill. There is no test that I'm aware of.
Right, this just says, fill material shall be free of seeds and viable parts of invasive plant species declared by the current FISC invasive plant list. There's no way, no known way or known practical way to do that.
And if you're to screen that fill material down to that level to try to get those seeds out of it, I mean, the cost, I
Some of them might
shudder
even
to
go
think
through
that.
the number 200.
Well,
Exactly.
that's why I asked,
Think
is
of
there a
the
way
cost of it.
to instead of
If-
putting
if
that
Bruce is
provision
bringing
in,
$3 million of fill, and it's gonna be $4 million, but.
just require the invasive species management plan as a condition of the fill permit?
So, one of the things, David, we discussed when I met with them, all right, and what I would tell you in general, and I said there's a fine line between a mass grading permit, a preliminary development plan, and a fill permit. Fill permit is David Goldstein has a low spot in David's backyard that holds water that he doesn't like it, and he needs to put more than 5 yards of dirt in there to fill it, and he comes in down at the building department and applies for a fill permit. And it gets routed through Brad's department. I want to go take down a 12-foot hill to build a future boat and RV storage, that's a mass grading permit or a preliminary development plan. The point being, fill permits are generally mom and pop permits. And do we want to, one of the things that I was insistent about when I met with staff is that we make some kind of exemption for the little guy in here, because to prepare one of the plans as proposed, the invasive species inventory and then management plan, is an unreasonable financial burden on most homeowners in this county, let alone them being able to even find the professional to do it. And I know that just from the world of things like, you know, they require a grading plan for a swimming pool. Do you know how many people call my office crying that they've called every engineer in town and nobody will take their job to prepare the grading plan? Well, this is going to be the same thing. There's a limited pool of biologists and environmental scientists out there, and they're not going to come out and prepare this massive plan, especially in the detail that's specified later on in this thing, to that, you know, mom and pop can't afford that.
It actually is not that hard. As a landscape architect, I see many other projects, and maybe not in this state, where the engineer actually does the specs. And as they're doing the clean fill, you know, most of the plants, they grow on the top layers, and most of the fill comes down from the bottom layers. The bottom layers doesn't have a lot of these seeds, they have a lot of these rhizomas. So it can be some of those elements that, you know, we're talking about that can be incorporated in the development review manual.
Yeah, Roberto, just from my
And for the-
perspective, and
I'm
just
sorry,
again, yeah, go ahead, sorry. I thought you were done.
And so, in addition to the field permit, the field permit is not necessarily only for filling up your backyard, but it also has other elements like the floodplain element, that you're gonna ensure that it doesn't do all that. So there's a lot of more review that goes into the mine, into the field permits. So with those things in mind, I think that the elements on the development review manual can address what you're talking about.
You know, I'll give you an example. Just before being appointed to this seat, I was working on the floodplain management ordinance. And one of the things that's included in our floodplain management ordinance is that if you're in zone V, is to do a wave run-up analysis. And I harped and hemmed and hawed back then that you can put this in the ordinance, but there's nobody around here that knows how to do a wave run-up analysis. And there still isn't. And I was just involved with one where the applicant, rather well-known applicant, on her property got a proposal for $40,000 to do a wave run-up analysis for her seawall. That's what I see happening here. That is not a reasonable burden to put on the average citizen. I understand when we're talking about the big developers, you know, the Lennars and the D.R. Hortons and the KB Homes of the world, they can probably absorb some of these costs. But think about what would happen if I all of a sudden saddled you with that burden for something that you needed to do.
Well, a landscaper can do all these analysis, and as they're throwing down the dirt, they can see that there's no rhizomas, there's no seeds, it's clean field. You don't need
With all
someone
due
who does
respect,
the
I'm an
investigation.
avid gardener, okay? I have a garden. And a rhizome that is the most miserable, I have 2 rhizomes in my garden, and most people have them in their yard, that are the most miserable things to deal with are pennywort, dollarweed, and nutsedge. And you can go pull nutsedge, and if a piece this long is left in the ground, that will grow back. And I have dug and dug and dug and dug and burned. You should see I have this flamethrower at home to try to burn out nuts. You can't. I can burn the green part off the top, but if any of that rhizome is left in that soil, it's right back a week later. I mean, and you can't. I can dig up in that sand and you can't see every little piece of rhizome. That's an impossibility. That's not practical.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I understand the intent of the ordinance and where things are trying to go and the direction you guys have been given. I just, how does this get enforced? How does it, I mean, just the reporting, how many of these applications did the Development Review Department get this year? Whatever that number is, multiply it by 2, because that's how many different reports you're gonna get over the next year for all these studies that are gonna come in, because they're required every 6 months. I mean, the amount of reporting, the amount of burden you're putting on the applicant, to me, this just seems like it's way over and above what the intent is of the direction you guys have been given.
No problem. And I think I told you when I met with you, if you get a plan from 2GH Solutions and we've got a clearing plan or a demolition plan, there's a note on every one of our plans, and it's not necessarily required by county, but it's our standard practice. You're gonna remove any exotic and nuisance species, right? That's a common thing, and I would tell you that Pinellas County requires that, and Hillsborough County requires that, and the applicants generally do that. I've got a site right now that's under construction that was probably covered 90% in Kogan grass before we cleared it. And I would also tell you that just by clearing and grubbing and the construction activity, that Kogan grass is gone. And after we pave the place, it ain't coming back. But I think a lot of this, it's interesting because the construction activity itself, when we're clearing and grubbing a site, we're gonna strip off the top 6 inches of soil anyways. That's where that rhizome is. And I was looking at Kogan grass management plans when in doing research for this ordinance, and they'll recommend disking the soils at least 6 inches deep. Well, that's a standard practice. We strip the top 6 inches off anyways. Does that mean Kogan grass can't grow back or won't grow back? No. But at the end of the day, it's a lot less of a problem after the development than it probably was before the development. But I'm with Jamie. I mean, the reporting requirement that's proposed at the end of this memo, who's gonna do all that? You guys are gonna have to create a separate department just to receive, review, and file. And I deal with this with the water management district. When you build a stormwater pond, it comes with a condition that you've got to get a professional engineer to come inspect this pond every 2 years if it's a wet pond with a filter, or every 5 years if it's a dry pond. And I would tell you in the old days, it just used to be a standard every 2 years. Well, the district can't even keep up. It's issued so many thousands of permits over its history that it cannot possibly keep up with these engineer inspections every 2 years. I get people calling me, they're all freaked out because they got a letter from the water management district that their inspection is due and they're gonna get in trouble if they don't get the inspection in by the deadline. And we just sit there and laugh. I'm like, you cannot do this for the next 10 years and you're never gonna hear from them because they got 10,000 others just like you in a stack. And that's what's gonna happen to you.
So, Roberto, well, can I just, let me just.
Go ahead, David.
So,
I had a question for John.
what is the purpose of the reporting? Because if it's an enforcement tool, couldn't you just, invasives are sort of, you can see them with the naked eye, right? As long as they grow. So why couldn't it be enforced like any other land development code requirement, that if you actually see invasives growing, they've overtaken the site or whatever, then you call out code, they cite them for violating the management plan. What is the benefit of all the reporting? Why not just enforce like we would any other land development code provision?
David, the reporting requirement did not come from those of us here. It came from Natural Lands, and they're the ones who are going to be receiving the reports and doing the monitoring. They have a representative available that I think should probably be answering these questions.
And just before
Make a budget request?
he says anything, just the good news is that we're not adopting the reporting. That reporting is on the development review standards, which can be changed at any time. We're not adopting the reporting.
I know, I understand that, but, although I do have one question about what you are adopting, but as it relates to enforcement, but whose idea was it to require reporting? I understand
Well,
it was
the natural resources.
So my question is, why can't you just rely on our normal enforcement process instead of requiring all this reporting? I understand that you can't answer, but maybe somebody can.
So,
Eh.
okay, there we go. I think he's unmuting himself. It's Matthew Hutzinger on the line.
Yes, hello, Matthew Hunsinger from Natural Resources. How's it going?
Good.
So Melissa Charbonneau, the Natural Resources Manager, she's unable to be here today. But I can definitely take these questions to our staff and we can get back to you.
Okay, so did you hear the questions, Matt?
I did, I have them all written down, yes, sir.
So I have a somewhat related question, which does go to what is being adopted, which is how is enforcement handled on a typical residential subdivision? In other words, there's language at the beginning that says that the plan is basically, I'm gonna use the exact phrase that you all use. Let me find it. That it says that it has to be, it says ongoing maintenance monitoring. The invasive management plan shall be managed and perpetuated by the HOA, CG, property owner, applicable entity, or assigned responsible party on those lands owned or directed, controlled by the HOA, CG, property owner, et cetera. My question is, in a typical residential subdivision, if you see invasive species growing on a residential lot, are you citing the HOA or are you citing the lot owner?
This doesn't go to that kind of enforcement at all. The way that it's written is that it's for all new projects going forward, it's not retroactive, there's really no way to make it retroactive since it's application
I'm only talking
driven.
about perspective, a brand new residential
But no,
subdivision.
we're not looking at homeowners at all. Because they're not going to have those contracts with the landscapers and so forth that all of our CDDs and HOAs have. That, not all of them, some have varying grades of talent in their consulting contracts. But that is going forward on those tracks that are then conveyed to the HOA or the CDD as an ongoing requirement of those entities that take ownership of that after the developer is gone and done. Individual homeowners aren't included in this at all. And one of the things we wanted to avoid happening was an HOA going rogue and going after homeowners that have lantana in their planting beds, or lyrope, which is now being a listed species, I guess.
Well, so what in here makes it clear that that's only HOA or CDD property, so?
The language David just read.
Well, it's kind of broad, I'm not sure I read it that
Yeah,
narrowly.
Me either. There's a declaration that gets recorded over the property, and I make the presumption that this invasive management species plan is going to be applied over the property of which the individual lots are part of.
Do you
Yeah,
want
I
to?
could
I
see
think
that,
the problem is it says property owner in that list, which, in my opinion, could be construed to mean the lot owner.
Okay, we can fix that. Could you put up the development review manual guidelines for the, not enforcement, but the guidelines that were created by Natural Lands to assist with how this is implemented? There's a,
Attachment 3.
okay, thank you. Yeah, there's a provision there about this very thing, so let's take a look at that.
While they're pulling that up, John, on like Swift Mud, looking at retention ponds and stuff, does Swift Mud require looking at invasive species? Is that part of that inspection?
I
or-
would tell
that was
you
one
is
of my
if that
questions.
you were going to impact a wetland, or you were going to enhance a buffer, and that was part of your mitigation strategy or agreement with the district, that would be a condition that you would remove these exotics and invasives. And I would tell you that generally if one was creating most people don't create wetlands today. They'll go and buy credits in the mitigation bank. In the old days when you created wetlands, then they would have maintenance and monitoring provisions that you'll go in and, inspect this and keep the Brazilian pepper out and the, Peruvian primrose willow and that kind of thing.
So I think, Elizabeth, part of the issue is, I think I know why you have that in there, because there are probably some commercial sites that don't have an HOA, so that all the common areas are being maintained by the commercial lot owner. To me, if your intent is to not subject individual residential lots to this ongoing requirement, I think you just need to come out and say it. That individual residential lots are not subject to enforcement of this requirement, or whatever. I mean, my other slight concern is if the management plan might just say, in theory, somebody could submit a management plan saying that the individual residential lot owners are responsible for controlling the
And that
invasive
probably needs to be clarified in what the requirements is for you submitting that maintenance plan. And who you have to identify in a restrictive covenants or something, who's going to be doing this after you, the developer, walks away, just like you do with your restrictive covenants.
But you're telling me the intent is only for common areas under the control of an HOA,
Some
CDD,
entity, yeah.
or some other common maintenance entity?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mr. Moody owns a residential lot in a subdivision and allows a bunch of invasive species to grow on his lot, and nobody's gonna cite him? Is that what you're telling me?
That's the intent, because we do know that folks are planting things in their landscape beds that are invasive. We don't want homeowners going after each other and so forth. That's the wrong one, guys. It's the other attachment.
Management plan guidelines.
Identify the successors and assigns if known. How would they be known?
Well, typically on an MPUD, we require common areas they have to identify who the common maintenance entity is going to be. But to me, when I read it, it wasn't clear that you were attempting to exempt individual residential lot owners. I don't see anything in there that clearly says that.
And can it be made clear that the declaration, a developer records a declaration over the entire property. Sometimes those declarations contain architectural restrictions, lawn maintenance restrictions, so on and so forth, that it is not a requirement that the declaration include this invasive species management plan. And what I'm concerned about is on the current proposed list in the category 2 species, I quickly checked today before I came in. I can go down to Home Depot and Lowe's right up the road here, and Queen Palms and elephant ears are on sale in the nursery today.
As is lantana.
Yes, as is lantana, which we had a lengthy discussion about.
That's because they haven't read this yet.
Well, David, that's an easy fix. I mean, we can simply say it doesn't apply to residential lots, whatever. I mean, in the whole thing, like I said, this is application driven. The individual property owner is the one who's not applying for the management plan. So the idea was that if you were having to do this step, then it's your responsibility going forward. But I can see how there could be confusion as to
Well, I
whether
wasn't
that
sure where the
applies to
management plan
individual.
encompassed individual residential lots.
Right, well,
That's where I
we can
wasn't
fix
clear.
that.
Okay.
Do we need to take public?
Yeah, is there any other questions for Roberto, or, I know there's,
The category 2 species. Why are we listing category 2 species when even your own document says these species, these have increased in abundance or frequency but have not yet altered Florida plant communities to the extent shown by category 1 species. These species may become category 1 if ecological damage is demonstrated. So why, if there's been no ecological damage demonstrated, why are we after these things today? And I look at this, just a simple analogy. This is basically saying these species may become a problem. Well, your dog may bite somebody, but that doesn't mean we put your dog down today.
We can put
And
them
so
on a
I don't
leash.
understand, and especially when these things are on sale at every nursery, and, you know, like I said, I checked the Home Depot and Lowe's website before I came in here today. They're on sale up there today, a lot of these things. So I question why we need to, I have no issue with the Category 1 species, but the Category 2 seems like now we're really trying to stretch it. That these are things that haven't become a problem, that might become a problem. We could make laws about things might do this and might do that, and
Well, I think that's a question that Matt should answer, but from what I understand from Melissa and Jackie, who aren't here, is why would you want to wait for it to become a problem when it has the potential to be a problem? Something along those lines, because they haven't yet done the amount of damage that ones have, but it's coming, is what I understood. The items for sale in the Lowe's and the Home Depots, you can't use those as part of your landscape plan, so you're not going to have those purchased in fulfillment of the Land Development Code's requirement for a landscape plan. We're not able to, of course, to control what individual homeowners do after, because they're not planting according to a plan.
Elizabeth,
So that kind of answers the
I submit a
question.
landscape plan for a commercial site, okay? And I follow the ludicrous list that I squawked about back in 2004, 5, or 6, or whenever it was we did. The ludicrous list that makes me have 8 different species of trees when there weren't even 8 different species of trees to begin on the site, and now I'm planting cypress trees on top of sandhills so I can meet the species diversity requirement. And maybe some of those things need to be revisited someday. But you plant the trees and the bushes on your commercial site, and then one gets run over by a car, it dies, and the new manager of the restaurant or whatever store, he calls in the landscaping company and says, hey, plant something over here. And they go get a queen palm. Or put in 3 queen palms because it counts as a shade tree. Nobody's going around after the fact, 20 years later, hey, you got a site plan approval back in 2004, and you said you were going to have 3 palmetto palms here to count for your shade tree. Nobody goes back and looks to see if those are there. In fact, I see landscape all over the county that's not been maintained per its original installed condition. So these things are going to happen. People are going to plant these things, especially if they're easily acquirable.
Did Matt want to respond to the question? Is he elevated so he can? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at this, at the list and the category too. I mean, we have already narrowed down the list quite a lot based off of the last meeting, so we can take a look at that.
So
Didn't I understand that if it becomes a problem, it becomes a Category 1? It gets moved off the Category 2 and gets moved to Category 1, isn't that what you said at the
It goes
beginning?
back and forth, it depends on how they get assessed by FISC. Sometimes they move down, sometimes they move up.
Okay.
Sometimes they even get eliminated from the list.
So if it's,
It seems if it gets moved to the Category 1, then we worry about it.
right, that's my point. I don't know.
These species under Category 2 are species that are seen in, Matt could probably, are seen in Pasco? Is that the reason why they're, I kind of agree, I don't know why
Yes.
there's the.
It was pared down
Okay.
to species that have been found in Pasco, I believe. Is that correct, Matt? I believe Jackie said
That is correct. That is correct. And also, these Category 2s, they may become Category 1, but it's also site-specific on how the layout of the site is and how they're actually taking into the site. So, site-specifically, it could take over and become a Category 1 based off of
Matt,
what it's doing.
with all due respect, I owned a home and had 3 queen palms in my front yard, and I can't think of one instance where another queen palm popped up out of the ground. Whereas the nutsedge in the yard spread like wildfire.
Yeah, I understand that. Like I said, we can take a look at this list and narrow it down some more.
Is there any other questions for Roberto right now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Let's grill this guy.
Mr. Hobbit.
Mr. Chairman, and blessed members of the Planning Commission. Clark Hobby, Hobby and Hobby, PA, 109 North Brush Street. I've been sworn, although I don't think that matters for this hearing. I just had a couple of comments, and again, I'm not trying to get in staff's business on this kind of thing because they have a lot more expertise than I do, but there are a couple of things that hit me about this. One is, and I've heard Commissioner Starkey talk at length about her recent fixation with trying to get rid of Kogan grass. And I just want our staff to know, the folks who are here online, I have clients and friends that have spent the better part of the last 10 years trying to do everything possible on their ranches to kill Kogan grass, spent in excess of $10,000, well more than that a year spraying it, and we cannot find anything that eradicates it. We have full-time employees spraying it, and it comes back, and it comes back, and it comes back. So I think we're asking our citizens, HOAs, CDDs, a bit much when, to my knowledge, no one has been able to find a way to kill Kogan grass. If we wanted to regulate Kogan grass as an invasive species so that it was not encouraged in some way, that's fine, but to my knowledge, nobody's been able to find a way to easily eradicate it. So we need to be mindful of that, and however you draft this. If I'm wrong about that, staff can advise me, but I would love to know what the answer is there, because none of the folks who own a lot of land have been able to figure it out. Secondly, I noticed, I think one of the approvals that some of these things would apply to are, I think it was mines was listed in there. I don't think we want to be talking about applying herbicides and pesticides near mines that usually have open water bodies in them, and some of which are connected and pierce the confining layer. So staff should probably think about that a little bit. You have a limestone mine and you've pierced the confining layer, you've got to be really careful about the application of pesticides and herbicides in the littoral zone so that you don't create a bigger problem with the surface water body, or even worse, the aquifer, especially when you have a direct connection in some of these areas. And then lastly, and I think Denise is probably more aware of this, and David as well, when we got to be precise about the areas that we're talking about when we say common areas or where the areas are that are to be maintained. And the reason why is, if you look at all of our MPUDs and there's sections of the comp plan and the LDC that talk about creating, and it's uses more than the word common areas, there are requirements to have conservation easements and set-asides on many, many developments now. And so when we come in for a conservation area and an area that's not to have any development, we frequently have to record a conservation easement, or there's a platted conservation easement. But the developer in almost all of those scenarios is only doing that to prohibit development in the area, and we're not going to have any ability to continuously into perpetuity maintain and take out all invasive species. And one of which that we ran into this, like 18 months ago. At some point, staff started thinking that we were going to do that on 2 rivers, and it would have required us literally, it was probably 1,500 acres of land that we would have had to continuously maintain and remove invasives from, where the only intent in the comp plan when we created these policies was just to ensure that there could never be development in the areas when they're outside the development proposed bubble areas. So I would ask that staff go back and be very careful where they're requiring the affirmative obligation to maintain these things. And it can't just be in areas that are, not going to be developed. It's one thing if we're talking about a common area where somebody's driving in and we've got an entry road and we're trying to create entry features where a CDD or HOA is likely have a higher level of maintenance. But we're not going to maintain these areas that are in conservation easements in most cases. We're just ensuring that there's no development there. So I just want staff to be careful in the language that it's not accidentally triggering that kind of maintenance. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Elizabeth, I have one more question for you about the individual lot exception or the intent. So I get why you don't want to apply it to individual lots, but what if the HOA, say Mr. Moody has his lot, and he builds a Kogan grass farm on his lot. So shouldn't the HOA have the ability to, if they want to, enforce on individual lots? Because otherwise his Kogan grass farm might spread to common areas in the subdivision.
Well, I think that we're not, I don't know if we want to be in the business of compelling HOAs to go after their residents. I mean, that seems like that's an HOA decision.
You don't have a problem with it with their architectural standards or the parking on the street.
I didn't write those, so.
You meaning the county government.
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting that the HOAs should be required to go after Mr. Moody. What I'm saying is, shouldn't they have the option, if they want to, because that's a private deed restriction, if they're worried that Mr. Moody's Kogan grass is gonna spread, say his lot is right next to the common area, and to Mr. Hobby's point, they're doing everything they can to get rid of the Kogan grass in their common area, but they can't control it because Mr. Moody has a Kogan grass farm right next door. I would think that the HOA should have the ability to take some enforcement action against Mr. Moody. Otherwise, it's gonna be impossible for them to keep the
Actually,
Kogan
the
grass.
Florida Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services has the ability to do that, and I was actually gonna bring that up here, thank you, because you can't farm Kogan grass, that's against the law in this state. For the list of plants, there is a whole Florida Administrative Code section, and I'm sorry because I didn't write it down before I came, but you can quickly Google that. FDACS has a list of noxious weeds and plant species that are prohibited in this state to cultivate, propagate, and Kogan grass is one of them, right along with Brazilian pepper and a lot of the other things on the FISC list. I didn't make a big deal of it because our comprehensive plan says that we're going to use the FISC list for identification of the species, so, but one can't farm Kogan grass. And Moody proudly lives in an area where there's no HOA, and he will never live in an area where there is an HOA.
He can grow a lot, but he can't grow Kogan grass.
John, what was the
Can we
name
get rid of the
that?
nuts edge, though?
You said that was Florida Department of Ag has the list, you said?
Yes, if you,
Okay.
and if you just Google Florida Department of Agriculture, noxious weeds, there's a whole Florida Administrative Code section that lists those weeds.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at the comp plan right here. I have the provisions on invasive species removal, and it actually references the Florida Exotic Pest Plant
That is the
Council's
FISC.
list. That's the FISC list? Okay.
That's the former name of the
Okay.
FISC.
So all I was trying to say, Elizabeth, is that if you're gonna exempt the individual residential lots, you need to put a carve out unless the HOA independently wants to take enforcement action against them. I don't think they should be prohibited from stopping Mr. Moody's Kogan grass farm.
One other thing I wanted to point out for Clark is I brought up had this methodology section put up here because this is in the development review manual potentially. The idea is that it's a site-by-site decision-making process, so if it's inappropriate to use those kind of chemicals near the water body, hopefully staff will, working with the applicant and putting this together, say, well, wait a minute, you don't want to use those chemicals, okay?
Thanks, yeah, that was actually, that was what I was getting ready to say as well, that it's to do the plan, and the plan is site-specific, and, we'll just direct them all to use Commissioner Moody's flamethrower instead of chemicals in those areas.
It's interesting because I did a whole bunch of reading about control of Kogan grass, and there's people that have tried burning it, but the problem is and Kogan grass is, I guess, apparently very flammable, but it doesn't burn the rhizome underground, so it immediately comes right back, and I can tell you I have the same experience with nutsedge. I can go through with the flamethrower and burn the tops off all I want, and it's coming right back next week. So that doesn't necessarily work, but that's one of my concerns about this too, is that we're trying to ask the private development community, and I'm not saying we shouldn't ask them to try, but we're trying to impose a requirement upon them that 100 years of science hasn't figured out how to get rid of. And from my reading, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but I saw there were 2 chemicals used in the treatment of Kogan grass, One was glyphosate, which I'm sure if you watch the news, and there's been multi-billion-dollar lawsuits about its cancer-causing properties, okay? And glyphosate cannot be sprayed anywhere near surface water. And then the other one, I'm gonna mess this up, a Zimpapir or Mizapir or something like that, which is a broad-spectrum herbicide that the overspray kills everything it touches. So if you spray this stuff and it goes on an oak tree, it kills the oak tree. So we don't really have a lot of good answers to dealing with Kogan grass. And I did read one thing that was very promising. There's a lady in the Panhandle who uses pigs to put on the property and go root up the Kogan grass, and they've had some success with that, but I don't think it's practical for us to put pigs down in the county's drainage ditches to see if they can root up the Kogan grass, or in front of Murata for that matter. You know, I heard Commissioner Starkey talk about the Kogan grass in front of Murata. Last time when I was on the way to Dade City, I saw it. I could see it from 52, and it's sitting right there by the edge of the detention pond in the front. What are those people to do? They can't use these herbicides, we got surface water there. What is it we want them to do? I guess they can go try to dig it up, but even that's proven that it'll come back unless you can get every bit of rhizome. I'm not saying they shouldn't try, don't get me wrong, but now we're looking at where you can potentially send code enforcement out there because they've got some Kogan grass that, like I said, 100 years of agricultural and biological and environmental science hasn't figured out how to get rid of. And all of a sudden, the private development community is going to do it.
Maybe I
do have one more
Right.
question, because I want to understand how this is going to work in the context of protected trees. So if the Kogan grass has overtaken trees that we want to retain, or vegetation that we want to retain, is part of the plan, are they allowed to just clear cut the entire site because they're getting rid of the invasive species?
Can you repeat that?
Let's just say that you've got a site where it's got a lot of invasive species mixed with trees that we want to protect. As part of this plan, are they allowed to just clear cut the site and not mitigate for the protected trees? I'm just trying to understand how this works. I mean, I'm worried about an overreaction to this where somebody says, fine, I'll get rid of the damn Kogan grass, I'll dig up the entire site, and you just have dirt and concrete. I guess that's my concern is there gonna be an overreaction to this where we lose protected trees?
So this is something that is going to be looked at, these plans get looked at by our natural resources team. They're going to look at each site independently and the combination of species that are there and the amount. And they're going to come up with a unique plan for each site. Or the applicant's going to come up with a unique plan and they're going to look at it and see if that's appropriate.
Does our natural resources department have proven experience getting rid of Kogan grass, getting rid of Brazilian pepper? Because there's all kinds of, like I said, Clark mentioned his agricultural interests that can't figure out how to get rid of it. The University of Florida hasn't figured out how to get rid of it. But our natural resources department knows. Because if they do, they should go publish the answer for the rest of the country to figure this out too. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate their wanting to try. And I am willing to pass an ordinance or recommend passage of an ordinance that attempts to do what we can do, but I think we have to have reasonable expectations when we do it. And I just hate to see this idea, you know, we're putting a burden on an HOA in perpetuity. We're talking about, we could potentially call code enforcement out. In fact, I read the article in the newspaper in the Tampa Bay Times, basically tells the public, if you see Kogan grass, call the county to report it. Well, Okay, so now who's gonna go do what about that? I mean, we're still trying to fix potholes and stormwater pipes that are clogged up, and by the way, just on the south side of the Sheriff's Operations Center, on the other side of this parking lot is a retention pond that is infested with almost every one of these species on this list. What are we doing about that? Let's clean up our own act first.
Well, Brad, so that's ultimately my fear, though, is even if it's not the developer, let's just say it's the HOA. Say, if there is Kogan grass or something in a common area, and we cite them, is the HOA gonna come back and say, fine, I'm clear cutting the whole damn thing? All those trees that you asked me to plant because I could see an HOA doing that. It might be cheaper for them to clear cut the entire common area and just dig it all up than try to go through and remove the invasives. So I'm trying to figure out, is there something in here that prevents that from happening?
Their approved landscape
So, again, it would be based on the plan that the HOA submits to Natural Resources. If they submit, hey, we want to clear cut this entire thing, I'm not going to speak for Natural Resources or their expertise, it's more than me, but I would think that they would say, that's excessive, and we don't want you to do that. Based on the combination that you have, we think that you should do this or this other thing, something along those lines. I'm assuming that that's kind of what the intent is with the kind of the uniqueness of the plan for the site itself. You know, there may be people that want to come in and do certain things, and yes, while there's really no way to necessarily get rid of Kogan grass, there may be a way to deal with other exotics that then won't perpetuate the Kogan grass. There may be a way to kind of, do something there, I'm not sure. But those unique combinations of things are what the Natural Resources team is going to be looking at when people submit those plans.
And you would need a permit to remove those trees anyhow, especially if they're required plantings as part of the landscape plan. I think that there's probably ways to catch that concern. Another thing that I told some of you commissioners when we had our one-on-one discussions, that there is a reworking of the tree ordinance. I think he told you that, John. And there's some other ideas they have there about looking at tree stands instead of trees themselves, and actually talking about retaining vegetation on site in those tree stands. So this is going to definitely come up as a conversation, I'm sure, again, in regards to invasives and those type of tree stands and areas.
Okay.
I heard the presentation yesterday. We'll save the comments on that for later, but
I just had a couple of general questions on right-of-way permits. It sounds like everybody up here understood, but I didn't hear the presentation. So is there a reason why right-of-way permits are included in here?
The thinking behind that is that we have a lot of different entities that do pull right-of-way use permits besides us, a developer. You've got utility companies and other folks that use our right-of-way all the time. We're going through efforts to clean up our right-of-ways through Public Works, and the idea is that other folks working in the right-of-way as part of the reclamation, when they're done doing their work on our right-of-way to clean up invasives, if there are invasives there, as part of that reclamation effort. So that's kind of how that came up.
they're out there filling wetlands, filling wetlands to create staging areas as they go through and upgrade the power lines and power poles. They're all of a sudden going to get rid of the Kogan grass? We can't even get them to follow the wetland laws.
The point is they're required to have a reclamation plan for cleaning up work they've done in our right-of-way. So the idea is having this as an additional requirement as part of that reclamation effort. And we've exempted the single-family home scenario as an overburden to the single-family homeowner that John was concerned about, and but leaving it there for other entities that are pulling those permits.
Okay. I was just trying to picture that example precisely of Duke and however many hundreds of permits they pull every year, and all of a sudden they've got this reporting requirement and the onus and the burden it puts on them. That's all.
I get the idea of what their response will be to you too
Right.
about that too.
Okay.
And probably one of the reasons for that is because there's no regulations that we have available to go after them.
All right. Okay. Any other questions, comments? So where do we go from here? Is any motions?
I'm not sure where to go with this, to be honest with you.
Well, staff is requesting that you find it consistent with the comprehensive plan. There is a policy series beginning with Objective Con 1.8, elimination of exotic nuisance plant species. That would be the portion of the comprehensive plan that this LDR is seeking to implement.
Because I'm not comfortable with the fill. And again, my
So-
concern, and to be honest, I'm sorry, I didn't try to come up with tightening of language to talk about just the project area versus the example I used, so I'm not necessarily comfortable with that either.
That's kind of where I'm at, Chris. I see the good, and I don't
Yes,
want,
right.
and I don't want to let perfection become the enemy of good here either.
Agreed.
But I think it needs more work. It needs more thought, more polish. Again, the intent is good. I get it. My thinking is maybe to go back and rethink some things based on the discussions, maybe circle back with other professionals and stakeholders. I mean, I hear we're relying on the natural resource people, but has anybody called in the environmental scientist community to come in and look at this? I bounced it off of one of the consultants that we work with this week, but I haven't bounced it off the others, but maybe bring in some of those regular environmental consultants that we see here for the wetlands and that kind of stuff, because they're the guys that are gonna end up having to go out and create these
Do the
plans, because
report?
I'm not qualified to do it. And I think you should get some feedback from them as to what is practical, what's cost-effective, and then think about some of the questions that David's asked from legal perspective. And then maybe bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the good, and I see the good in portions of this ordinance. I'm just concerned about the burden and even the enforceability and even the, can anybody even abide by this and
Yeah.
meet this?
And that's what I'm getting at, Jamie, too.
Um,
I think that they need to rethink some of that stuff.
Right.
So, Roberto or Elizabeth, obviously there were some questions asked of natural resources that they were not able to answer. If this got continued for, I guess my question is, if this got continued, how long would it need to be continued for so we can get answers to some of those things?
I don't know what the agenda timeline and deadlines and so forth like that are for us. So I don't know realistically how much time there is actually to get work done between meetings. I don't know.
So, question, back to the comp plan. I quickly, before I came to the meeting today, went through the comp plan, and I saw we had a whole section. Is there something, Elizabeth, is there language in the comp plan today that would allow Brad and Roberto to amend the development manual to perhaps require, like, for instance, if I submit a site plan, you've got these Pasco County standard site plan notes, that at least could start with, you've got a requirement to remove and dispose of exotic and nuisance species on the FISC category, whatever list, and that at least could do something today while we work out the bugs?
So we can do that anyway, I believe, through the basic language. I don't think there's any language that would prohibit us from doing that in the comp plan. The language speaks to removal of invasive species, so we can do it by a condition of approval on those plans.
I wouldn't be opposed to something like that.
We can start with something like that and look at
As
those.
a way to start, and then, see if we can get some improvement based on that, and then come back. If, we start with the hatchet, and then if we need the axe later, we come back with that, I don't know. But at least you could do something today.
I think you
Go ahead
could.
and continue this, and that would be probably my thinking on this, is to continue it, but at least you've got some tool that you could start using tomorrow toward furthering your goal, and I can appreciate the goal.
So just to clarify, the suggested condition would be to put the list of those invasive species in the development manual with the statement that you will, the condition of approval would be you'll need to remove these from your site, but it will not have the plan or the means or any of this other information in there. You just want the basic.
Start.
Okay.
It's more than there is today, right?
Yeah, we can do that.
At least the category ones, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'd
So we can start doing that.
be in 100% support, and I would say that you're in line with the surrounding counties and that they require that. Pinellas County requires that.
And Natural Resources does get those plans, generally, most of them,
Yeah.
that would come through. So they would be able to see that and
then, I mean,
comment further if they wish.
And I'm not suggesting that we necessarily throw away the ordinance, but then you kind of circle back, go out to me, I hate to see this rush through. You guys, in my opinion, you need to sit down with Clark and Barbara's clients. This affects them. You need to sit with the environmental science community and kind of get an idea from them as to what they think is practical and achievable, and then take all that into consideration and come back. But at least you'd have a tool to start with today.
Anything else?
I think the only thing that might not cover, though, is Brad does not issue right-of-way use permits, right?
No, I do not. But my team does review them, so our tech team reviewer, we could add that.
Can you recommend to
We
the Public
can
Works that that's a
recommend that,
condition?
yeah.
And then to be clear, to amend your development manual, you still have to at least publish the amendment on the website, I think is what we put.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's published, yeah. It's supposed to be if our website's working.
Well, I still think even if Brad intends to do that in the interim, you still have to decide what you're doing with this ordinance. Are you,
Well, what I'm trying to do is this. I think this needs work based on the discussion we've had today. I'm not saying it's all bad, it just needs some work, it needs some polish, it needs some more thought about some of the questions you've raised and that others on the board today have raised. And so my thinking would be to continue this for a month or 2 months or 3 months or whatever it may be, to allow the polish to happen, but still leave these guys with some tool that they can start doing today. I think Commissioner Starkey, I've heard her at 3 or 4 meetings in a row squawking about the Kogan grass, so at least she knows you're doing something. I think it's a start.
We would like to be able to have this effective prior to October 1.
Well,
So, John, let me explain why.
Elizabeth, I hear you.
Can I explain why, please?
I understand why.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to tell you that personally, I'm politically opposed to that. The legislature wants you to provide a business or economic impact analysis for exactly this reason. This ordinance is going out and it's creating a burden on the private sector that's going to cost them money. This is exactly why the legislature, the governor signed that bill. These things do have an impact, and basically you're saying is, well, here, I want to ramrod this through so I can drive the impact before we actually have to disclose to the public what this is going to cost them. That's not right. But that's why, and I hear it all the time. I've heard David say sometimes the legislature preempts us. Well, it's because of that kind of behavior. That's why the legislature comes in and preempts us. We need to be careful of what we do. And I'm not proposing to push this back to October. I'm just citing for that reason. I'm personally politically opposed. And I think we need to be real careful about doing things that get the ire of the legislature, and that's one of them.
okay, so I asked a question earlier, which is how long will Natural Resources need to answer some of the questions that were, Elizabeth, I know you're perfectly capable of drafting some of the legal stuff in a week if you needed to, but I don't know if we heard briefly from Natural Resources that they would take some of the stuff back and discuss it, but I never heard how long it would take them to get answered. One of the biggest concerns I heard was the reporting requirement. So I haven't even heard from Natural Resources what they're gonna do with these reports, or why they can't enforce in other means. So how long will it take them to get answers to these things?
Matt, are you still on?
I would say 60 days to be fair, so, because I cannot speak for our manager who is not here, but I would say 60 days to at least answer some of these questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it probably shouldn't take too long. I did raise the kind of resource burden that this might bring to them. And so they're aware of it, and they said that they felt that they had a way to deal with that. So we just don't know what that is, because the right people aren't on the call necessarily. Matt can't speak for them.
60 days and came back to the planning commission, and hypothetically, the planning commission recommends approval and it goes on to the board, does that still leave time to get it to the board before October 1st?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't know the timeframes for deadlines. Maybe Patty would know better. I don't live in that world of having to schedule out months in advance to make a deadline for a memo.
Didn't the presentation already have scheduled for 2 meetings in June? So it's gonna have.
So I can answer the
Go ahead,
question, I
Denise.
think.
There you go.
Okay.
All
Sorry.
right. So, so you need 60 days, so I would imagine that we would not be able to get anything to you by July 25th, which is kind of sort of 60 days from now. So this can go to the Planning Commission meeting on August 8th.
Now, I'm sorry, we can have the questions answered as soon as possible as you need them. We can get it to the next meeting. I don't think we need 60 days.
Okay, so the next meeting is June 20th, Planning Commission.
Okay, we can do that.
So that's basically a 30-day continuance,
So-
pretty much.
But let me just ask the question.
And yes,
before
that you can get through the board meetings.
If it was July, could you still get 2 board meetings before October 1?
That's correct, yes. Okay, so June 20th is not going to work for us, so if we can continue it to July 11th, LPA?
I think where we're headed, of course, I'm talking, I hear a couple that might support me. Assuming there's a vote for a continuance, we're trying to accommodate you, not necessarily us. So if the July date, that's fine with me.
July 11th at 1:30 in Dade City.
And Denise, on July 11th, can we make sure that Natural Resources either here in person or available to actually answer questions? Because I'm no offense to Matt, but he wasn't really the person to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, preferably in person.
Yes.
So noted. I will send messages, and I'm sure Matt is probably doing that right now as well.
Okay, there's a motion to continue this, I think, John, was
Was it made?
that motion made, or no, I'm sorry?
I haven't made it. but
Okay,
I think
well.
we were trying to figure out the
Very good.
mechanics if it were to be made.
Sorry for jumping the gun. There's no motion yet.
So it was 11th July.
So
July
Roberto-
11th, 1:30 Dade City.
So we didn't hear the whispering, but Roberto, you're fine with July 11th? Roberto?
7-11.
Yep,
Okay.
7-11 is what we'll shoot for.
Okay.
Oh, that was a bad joke, Brad. I hope that wasn't a joke. Then I would move to continue this matter until the July 11th LPA meeting in Dade City.
I'll second.
All right, so motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Does your motion include a request? I realize you can't mandate it, but a request that development review, what is your department called now, bro?
Brad's department.
We're still guessing at it. Development Review Department.
The development review department begin some implementation of invasive species conditions and publishing the list in the development review manual.
So it's really publishing a list in the Development Review Manual. Natural Resources has actually been adding a generic condition in this regard anyway. So really the change is to add this to the manual.
Yeah, and
We
it's,
need our permission for that.
I can do that, don't need it.
All right.
Just tell me.
Sounds like you're gonna do it anyway.
Sure.
Good.
okay.
But if you want it as a site plan note, will you please put it on the website so we all know and we don't have to get it as a comment? We'll just put it on there.
John's still hoping for that one review or that it comes back as approved the first time.
He's been trying. We will make those recommendations and talk to folks at the pre-app meetings about that, so hopefully it's done ahead of time. But we can't make it a requirement of the site plan submittal because that's actually a code element, so.
Gotcha.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Denise?
You can beat your 4:45 deadline, Jamie.
That's right, I can make it. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.